Otis Redding, the king of soul, was known for his raw emotion, unmatched voice, and timeless classics like Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay. But behind the velvet voice and gentle smile was a man who quietly held deep grudges. For decades, fans speculated about the rivals and betrayals that haunted his brief but blazing career. Now newly uncovered interviews and private letters reveal the shocking truth. 6 iconic singers Otis Redding secretly resented. These weren't petty rivalries. These were deep, personal wounds that shaped the soul man's legacy. And the names on that list, they'll surprise you. Otis Redding was born on September 9, 1941, in Dawson, Georgia, and raised in the tough, segregated streets of Macon. His father was a preacher and sharecropper, and from an early age, Otis found comfort in music first, in the church choir, then in local talent shows. His voice stood out, rich with pain, soul, and truth. Influenced by Sam Cooke and Little Richard, young Otis knew music was his escape from poverty and racial injustice. As a teenager, he worked odd jobs by day and sang with local bands by night. He joined Johnny Jenkins and the Pinetoppers as a driver and backup singer, but fate intervened when he got the chance to record his own song at a session in Memphis. That song, These Arms of Mine, became a surprise hit and launched his solo career. Redding quickly became a force in Southern soul, recording hits with Stax Records and electrifying audiences with his raspy voice and passionate performances. Yet, as his fame grew, so did the pressures, rivalries, label conflicts, and personal betrayals. Despite his humble roots, Otis wasn't afraid to speak his mind behind closed doors, especially when he felt disrespected or copied. While he remained dignified in public, those closest to him knew he carried quiet resentment towards certain artists who either stole his sound, denied him credit, or looked down on him. These 6 names, finally revealed, paint a raw portrait of a man who gave everything to his music and paid a price for it. Number 1. Wilson Pickett. Otis Redding and Wilson Pickett were often mentioned in the same breath, 2 powerhouses of Southern soul, each with explosive voices and unforgettable stage presence. But behind the scenes, their relationship was far from friendly. According to those closest to Otis, there was a lingering resentment he never fully let go of. Otis believed that Pickett, who emerged shortly after his own rise to fame, not only borrowed heavily from his vocal style, but actively tried to outshine him by copying his signature growls, phrasing, and emotional delivery. To Otis, it wasn't just influence, it was theft. He felt that Pickett took the sound he had carved out of pain, struggle, and years of hustling in the South, and repackaged it with flashier production and more aggressive marketing. While Otis remained the humble soul man of Stax Records, Pickett's work with Atlantic gave him a broader national platform, and Otis quietly watched as Pickett's songs, like In the Midnight Hour, became hits that mirrored the same energy Otis had been putting into his recordings from the beginning. There was also tension on a personal level. Stories from former session players suggest that Otis viewed Pickett as arrogant and too eager to position himself as the king of soul music. While Otis was a collaborative spirit who often worked closely with his band and respected the creative process, he felt that Pickett saw music as a battleground, not a brotherhood. During one recording session at Muscle Shoals, Otis reportedly left the studio early, frustrated after hearing Pickett boast about taking over the charts. Though Otis never confronted him publicly, he did share his feelings in private letters and interviews, where he called Pickett a loud echo of someone else's pain. The final sting came when Otis learned that a producer had suggested Wilson Pickett cover one of his unreleased tracks, something Otis felt crossed a line. That betrayal, mixed with years of silent irritation, cemented Pickett's place on Otis's mental blacklist. He respected the man's talent, but not his tactics. To Otis, Wilson Pickett wasn't just a fellow soul singer, he was a shadow too, close for comfort. one that never acknowledged where the light truly came from. Number 2. Elvis Presley. Though Otis Redding never publicly criticized Elvis Presley, in private, his feelings were far more complicated and, at times, bitter. Elvis was undeniably a major figure in American music, but to Otis, he represented something far more painful. The face of an industry that celebrated white artists for sounds that black musicians had been creating for years in the shadows. Otis grew up listening to gospel, blues, and rhythm and blues, the very foundations of what Elvis built his empire on. Yet while black artists like Otis struggled for recognition, fair pay, and radio play, Elvis rocketed to superstardom, often with songs, styles, and moves borrowed from black culture. Otis didn't hate Elvis personally. He hated what Elvis symbolized. To him, Presley was the poster boy for a system that profited from black genius without giving it the credit it deserved. Otis once confided to a fellow musician that he found it hard to watch Elvis receive constant praise for pioneering a sound Otis had been living and breathing since childhood. It wasn't just about music, it was about history being rewritten in real time. The fact that Elvis covered songs written by black artists, like Big Mama Thornton's Hound Dog, and turned them into hits, while the originals were often ignored or forgotten, stung deeply. Otis saw this happen again and again, and it quietly enraged him. He once joked, "If I dyed my skin and straightened my hair, maybe I'd be on every billboard in America." Beneath the humor, there was a truth soaked in pain. What made the resentment stronger was the industry's hypocrisy. When Otis performed at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, he blew the crowd away, but it was still seen as a breakthrough, as if soul music hadn't been thriving for years. Meanwhile, Elvis could walk onto any stage and be treated as royalty. Otis didn't blame Elvis for the system, but he wished Elvis had done more to honor the roots of his sound. A simple acknowledgement, a public thank you, a nod to the source, that's all Otis ever wanted. Instead, what he got was silence. And that silence grew into quiet resentment that never left him. Number 3. James Brown. Of all the names Otis Redding quietly held resentment for, none stirred more mixed emotions than James Brown. Both men were Southern-born, soul-driven, and electrifying on stage, but where Otis was humble, collaborative, and deeply rooted in emotional expression, James was fierce, competitive, and famously protective of his spotlight. Their rivalry wasn't born of jealousy, was born of personality clashes, creative differences, and a growing sense that Brown saw the soul scene as a kingdom where he alone could reign. Otis admired James's energy and impact, but he found his attitude exhausting. In private conversations with bandmates, Otis described James as a genius with a crown too heavy to share. The tension between them wasn't always spoken aloud, but it was felt. When Otis began to rise in the mid-1960s, he expected camaraderie from fellow soul stars, but instead of brotherhood, he often felt James treated him like a threat. There were rumors that James deliberately booked shows near Otis's tour dates to outshine or outsell him. In one instance, Otis was reportedly bumped from a major TV appearance after Brown's team pressured producers behind the scenes. Otis never addressed it publicly, but he was deeply hurt. He believed there was room for both to shine, but James Brown didn't think that way. He wanted to be the sole face of soul, and anyone else was competition. Musically, Otis also had strong opinions. He felt that James's later music had become too showy, too driven by ego and gimmicks, drifting away from the raw emotional storytelling that soul was built on. While Brown focused on funk, fashion, and elaborate performances, Otis clung to the simplicity of pain, love, and truth in every note. In one studio session, Otis is said to have told his producer, "James is dancing for the cameras. I'm singing for the people." Though he never denied James Brown's talent, Otis couldn't ignore how their paths crossed in conflict more than celebration. Brown's refusal to acknowledge peers as equals, his behind-the-scenes power plays, and his growing obsession with being the godfather created a lasting strain. For Otis, it wasn't just rivalry, it was the loss of what could have been a powerful alliance in soul music's golden age.